This is Focus on Africa. I'm Lukwesa Burak. Our top stories. As concerns grow over the future of Mali, we unpick the complex issues within a country whose stability has serious regional consequences. A capital silence. Zimbabweans heed the authorities' warnings to stay at home and not protest as questions remain over the arrests of government critics. Also in the programme, yes, they have plenty bananas, but with nowhere to go. How's one of Ghana's top exporting sectors coping in a climate of economic uncertainty? And coming up in sport, we find out who's become the most expensive African player ever after he joined Italian Serie A side Napoli. Hello and welcome to our Friday edition of Focus on Africa, coming to you from BBC World News. We're going to start in Zimbabwe, where the main opposition party, the Movement for Democratic Change, says that several of their supporters have been arrested for taking part in anti-government protests. Now, despite calls for the public to take to the streets against alleged corruption and economic hardship, people have largely remained at home. Now, the police had warned that demonstrations were illegal under lockdown. The BBC's Shinganyoka reports now from the streets of Harare.
Throughout the day, the streets have remained largely empty and quiet as most people chose to stay at home. But the police and the security forces have been patrolling the streets and the suburbs, warning people against demonstrating.
As long as people are agitating for violence, as long as some activists are inciting people to engage in acts of violence, then they'll be committing criminal offences in terms of the country's laws. So people should just engage in peaceful activities, and definitely no one will arrest them.
The main opposition, the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance, says that several people were detained. A government critic and award-winning author Tsitsi Dangarembwa and another demonstrator were picked up as they demonstrated along the roadside. The MDC spokesperson Fadzai Mahere filmed herself as a group of riot police approached her to arrest her. This was meant to be a day to express outrage about the deepening economic crisis and corruption, and there had been fears of violence. The government had been talking tough, threatening to deal severely against what it called acts of insurrection. But in a graveside speech at the burial of the former Agriculture Minister Perence Shiri, Emmerson Mnangagwa, the president, had said that while he understands the grievances, they should be expressed in a way that does not expose people to COVID-19. Shinganyoka, BBC News, Harare.
To Mali now, a country at something of a crossroads in terms of its future leadership and direction. And this, of course, is on top of dealing with the pandemic. There's a crippling food insecurity and an ongoing Islamist insurgency. Now, the two main figures in this reckoning are President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, who's facing growing calls to resign, and Mahmoud Dicko. He's an imam heading up a loose alliance of groups. Now, regional leaders are concerned that if matters aren't resolved, it could further plunge Mali into instability, threatening the fight against Islamist extremists in West Africa's Sahel region. Now, all eyes will be on the country early next week once the Eid festival draws to a close, and the opposition is expected to hold more protests. So let's take you through those key events. Back in April, tensions boiled over when the Constitutional Court nullified 31 results from long-delayed parliamentary elections, giving those seats to legislators from the ruling party. Now, that crisis escalated, and in early July, 11 people were killed by security forces during anti-Keïta rallies. And it was all fueled by growing frustration over the president's perceived failure to tackle the economic crisis, rampant corruption, and an inability to resolve Mali's 8-year jihadist conflict. And then this week, on Tuesday, the opposition alliance and religious leaders, led by Imam Dicko, rejected a plan to break the impasse put forward by the 15-nation regional bloc known as ECOWAS. Now, in it, they propose setting up a unity government and the resignation of the MPs that were elected in those disputed April polls. So that's how it stands now. We've got those MPs that are refusing to stand down and the opposition leaders insisting that the president, who was re-elected in 2018, must resign. There you go. Let's discuss this further. We're going to speak to Paul Melly, a consulting fellow for the Africa programme at Chatham House. Thank you for joining us here on Focus on Africa. First off, this is a pretty complex picture. Why is it that ECOWAS can't bring them to the table to agree?
Well, it seems to be because there's a deep determination in the opposition alliance between Mahmoud Dicko, that imam, and a range of political parties. Every time they've held out, they've extracted more concessions. And they seem to believe that if they just keep holding on, they will get yet more clout. At first, they were offered an empty national unity government. Then they were offered guaranteed cabinet seats. Then ECOWAS said it would nullify these 31 contested parliamentary seats. But the big demand is for Keita himself to go. And that's where the problem lies, because ECOWAS is not prepared to cede that, because Keita is democratically elected, as you mentioned, for his second term in 2018. So there's a real crunch point, and it's hard to see where the deal lies, possibly in the sacrifice of the Prime Minister, possibly in some sort of agreement that really nails down Keita's commitments that he can get out of it.
So we had the 2015 peace agreement. I mean, there are huge questions over what's actually been achieved from that. How has Mali fared under President Keita?
Well, it's had a very difficult time, obviously, but the point is it could have made more progress, perhaps, with stronger political leadership. So often it's been his prime ministers who've been dispatched to the troubled areas in the centre or the north to talk to local leaders to try and promote mediation. But he hasn't really been very proactive. And there isn't really a sense of strong strategy to the government, either politically or economically. Keita sits there offering a rather generalist, populist sort of national pride agenda, but the prime ministers who don't really have political weight are left to try and implement things on the ground. And it could have been probably progressed much further, particularly with that peace agreement you mentioned, the Algiers agreement, which was supposed to give real decentralized power to the regions in the north. And if Keita had really pushed it and done some political haggling and really mobilized effort and votes in parliament and money, probably that agreement could have been more effectively implemented at the local level so that people in these troubled regions could see some sort of concrete practical results from the peace agreement.
Paul, when we start to look, I mean, a lot of people are only just learning about Imam Dicko. So obviously we've got the religious background there. Is that a good thing for a country like Mali?
Well, 90% of Malians are Muslim, so it isn't a question of whether Mali should be a Muslim country or not. And Dicko himself doesn't really seem to be pushing for an actual Islamic republic, a theocratic state. But realistically, he is the person who can bring a lot of people onto the streets. Back 10 years ago, he blocked a reform of family law that would have enhanced women's rights, just by the power that he had to bring people out in protests and mobilize. Last year, he forced the resignation of a previous prime minister. And the opposition, the formal opposition parties, don't seem to have on their own that sort of crunch point that could really deliver decisive political change and pressure, either at the ballot box or in terms of mass protest. But Dicko is there as a fact of life. You can't get around the fact that he is this very powerful, influential populist figure.
So it appears that there are so many actors involved in this complex crisis. Some questions have been raised about the role of the military, but I suppose all eyes now are going to be looking at any progress next week. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the difficulty is that ECOWAS has already played, if you like, its prestige cards. 5 presidents including President Buhari from Nigeria, flew into Bamako on the 23rd of July and tried to push and pressure the opposition into accepting a compromise deal. Then on Monday, ECOWAS had a summit, threatened sanctions against people who would block a deal, and they got the backing of the UN Security Council for that. But all these sort of big gun political tactics haven't cracked it. So now it may require some subtle behind the scenes mediation to try and find out within that opposition coalition what really is their bottom line. What guarantees would they require to come into some sort of national agreement? Because all those problems that Mali faced that you outlined in your introduction, all the time that people are on the streets in Bamako and the political class is paralyzed with these negotiations and this confrontation, all those huge problems of stability, poverty, insecurity, and of course COVID-19, they are not getting the strong government leadership that's required to really tackle them. So it's very hard to see what the solution will be, but probably some sort of inside mediation that uncovers what Diko's bottom line is, what he will settle for as a political deal that he will back, because otherwise opposition politicians won't budge. They will feel exposed unless they have his cover.
Paul Melly, fascinating conversation. Thank you very much. Consulting Fellow for the Africa Programme at Chatham House. Now, Muslims all over the world are celebrating Eid, one of the biggest religious events in the Muslim calendar. But how has the pandemic, with masks, we've got the sanitising gel and, of course, social distancing, how has that changed what is normally a very sociable, family-orientated celebration? Well, our reporter in Senegal, Rosemary Bobotu, finds out.
The streets in Dakar are empty today, but for the first time in a long time, not because of COVID-19, but because of the Eid celebrations. Many of the restrictions have been lifted in the last months, so families have been able to meet with neighbors to share in the festivities and even travel. However, coronavirus has made Eid al-Kabir celebrations this year more expensive, and worshippers are having to gather with scaled-back festivities. Closed borders, restrictions on movements between regions, and late rains have meant that cattle food was scarce this year, causing sheep prices to rise. In some markets, it is reported that sheep were selling for $145 last year have increased to more than $200. Meanwhile, Senegalese Muslims could not do the pilgrimage to the Mecca this year, which was closed to international worshippers by fear of spreading the virus. In his message delivered after the Eid prayer, the chief of the Mourides, one of the main Muslim orders in Senegal, called for forgiveness and encouraged Muslims to show more devotion to their faith.
That was Rosemary Bobotu there. You're watching Focus on Africa. Let's just take a quick look at some of the other stories that are making headlines. And we're going to start in the Ivory Coast, where President Alassane Ouattara has named Defence Minister Ahmed Bakayoko as Prime Minister. He's been acting in the post since his predecessor, Amadou Koulibaly, was in France receiving medical treatment, and then again also after his sudden death. Mr. Bakayoko is a former newspaper executive and also longtime ally of the president. Preliminary tests looking into the mysterious deaths of hundreds of elephants in Botswana earlier this month are indicating that a naturally occurring toxin may be the probable cause. Initial government investigations appear to rule out common causes such as poaching and anthrax, and instead on naturally produced toxins from bacteria, possibly in local water sources. You're watching Focus on Africa, coming to you from BBC World News. Still to come, we've got Peter with the sport and news that CAF President Ahmad hasn't quite made up his mind about that second term. Welcome back. Now, the full impact of this pandemic on world economies is becoming more and more evident as the weeks go by. Despite lockdown restrictions being eased, it's not always a given that a business will have an immediate recovery. Like tourism, the agricultural sector has been badly affected. Well, Thomas Nardi has been finding out how Ghana's banana growers are coping in a climate of huge uncertainty.
This huge banana plantation, covering a surface area of 600 hectares, is located at Isuchari in southern Ghana. The soil and climate here is ideal for cultivating the plant. The farm was started by Golden Exotics Limited some 15 years ago. Here, the company cultivates organic and conventional bananas for export. Ghana, Ivory Coast and Cameroon are among the major exporters of bananas to the European Union. Last year, Ghana alone exported 90,000 tons to Europe. Out of this figure, Golden Exotics Limited exported 77,000 tons. The company exports 250 tons of bananas every day. About 300 tons of bananas are processed in this facility each day before they are sent overseas. Over 70 employees work in this facility, and the management have had to introduce measures like this to prevent the spread of COVID-19.
The first activity is over there at the shadow net, where the banana is received. We conduct some quality checks on the banana to see if they are fit for export. And then it goes through the next stage. The bananas that are being hung over there are going to be handed from the bunch into smaller pieces. It is washed in the pool. So the bananas are selected according to the brand or according to the specification of the customer. And then it goes through the labeling, of the banana with stickers like SCD or Bio or the Fair Trade label.
In April, the Ghanaian authorities instituted a lockdown to help curb the spread of the coronavirus. It lasted several weeks. The pandemic has had a big impact on Golden Exotics Limited's operations.
The buying patterns were completely disrupted. When people were in lockdown, the demand for fruits, banana and especially pineapple went down completely. There were some weeks where the demand was very high, but we produce as we produce, and we didn't have extra volumes just to satisfy that demand, so we didn't benefit necessarily when demand was higher, but we lost out when demand was lower. Prices have been affected as nobody knows what's going on in terms of the market, and so the impact it's difficult to say month on month, but the end of the year result will certainly be massively impacted. In Ghana with the lockdown, that was, I think, planned quite well, the short lockdown we had, and businesses were consulted on how we could still do the exports. But with the borders being closed, it's had a huge impact on us.
It's not clear when the country's borders will reopen. Especially the COVID-19 impact on business will be felt for a long time.
That's Thomas Nardi. So, week one of what should have been Tokyo 2020 is coming to a close as we continue our Olympic rewind to some of Africa's greatest moments. Now, here's an interesting fact. I wonder if you knew that it is near impossible for athletes to break long-distance world records without the help of a pacemaker. Well, here's the man who did just that. Kenya's David Rudisha talks us through what is now known as the best performance of the entire London 2012 Olympics.
In that final, I wanted to do something special, to run a 141 without a pacemaker. I went there knowingly that I'm going to take this race. I always target the 600 because that is the most crucial part, and that one I knew if I cross with 114, then I knew definitely I'm going to run something like close to 141. After the 600, I saw the time was fast, 1 minute 14 seconds, point something.
That's when people began to sit up and take notice that there is something special in the offering here.
When I look at the big screen in front of me, these other athletes are very close. That got me a little bit worried. Am I not running that fast? That is when now I decided to hold my breath a bit just for the last 100 meters, because the most important thing that day was just to win a gold medal. It was also a surprise for me to run that 140.91.
I was stunned. I just sat there and said, am I seeing right? People who maybe don't necessarily follow athletics will still remember David Rudisha's 800 meters in London.
Winning an Olympic title and breaking the world record, it was just like icing on the cake. London, it was a very special occasion in my career as an athlete. There is nothing I can compare with it.
Absolutely fantastic. Let us catch up with the sport now. Peter, you remember that day, don't you?
Absolutely loved it. Was covering those games and it was a great day. Thanks, Lukwesa. Now, Nigerian international Victor Osimhen has become the most expensive African player ever after joining Italian Serie A side Napoli from French club Lille. According to the French sports newspaper L'Equipe, the deal is worth more than $96 million. Napoli have now paid more than Arsenal paid Lille for Ivory Coast Pepe a year ago. Now, the president of the Confederation of African Football, Ahmad, says he's undecided about running for a second term in office next year. CAF's next presidential elections are scheduled to take place in March in Ethiopia, where the Malagasy stunningly dethroned long-standing ruler Issa Hayatou in 2017. Ahmad, the subject of an ongoing FIFA ethics case, indicated that he's likely to decide later on and only with guidance from his colleagues.
I do not do this function out of personal ambition. I do it far more out of collective motivation, and currently, even if I think about it a little bit, I do not want to think about it too much. I'd rather put my energy into the obligations that CAF has to face these days, which are very urgent. I still take advice from all the participating parties of African football. Once that's done, well, I'll be able to say whether or not I go for a second term.
Now, let's meet Ndubisi Ebo. He's the Nigerian coach who has become the first African to lead a European team to the league title in the top flight and qualification for the UEFA Champions League. He achieved that feat with Albania's KF Tirana. The former Nigerian international has compared his feat to the election of a certain US president.
It is unbelievable, the atmosphere, the feeling. It's still yet not sinking in, because when the people start calling me, because I'm not the type that keeps statistics, that when I got to know that I'm the first African and the first Nigerian to win an European championship with an European team, I say, wow. Now coming in, we already broke a lot of record in the Albanian league this season, because when I took the team, we came from the 8th position. That is, when you're in the 8th position, you are going to play in the playoff for the relegation zone. So, and we were more than 15 points different from the team in the first position, and succeeding to win out of 23 games to win 20 games. So we cannot imagine how massive it was for us. And just like my fellow Africans or Nigerians here said, you don't know what you did for us by winning this championship. We cannot go in the street, just like when Obama won the presidency in America. That is exactly how the feeling is here.
Now, normally that would be the end of the sports news, but not quite, Peter, because there's something big going on this weekend.
Well, you know what? Even while working from home today, I had one eye on the TV watching the first and second practice for Silverstone Formula One on a race on Sunday. It looks like it's going to be a very hot weekend weather-wise, but it should be a hot weekend on the track as well. The drivers all look up for it, Lukwesa.
Peter, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.